my wrist. He cried when our parents showed up, said it was an accident. I was grounded for starting it. That's how things always were in our house. Julian made the mess, and I was the one who cleaned it up, or worse, punished for it. He was the boy with the bright smile, the clever lies, and the halo no one questioned. I was the one who made things tense. He got away with everything. Skipping school, stealing money from Dad's wallet, disrespecting Mom. They called it just being a boy. I got lectures for being too emotional, too sensitive, too much. If I ever cried, I was accused of making scenes. If I stood up for myself, I was told I was the reason the house never felt peaceful. By 13, I'd learned to keep my mouth shut. My room became my shelter, door-locked headphones on homework, my only distraction. Julian barged in whenever he wanted, took what he liked, and laughed at the rest. My parents barely looked up. On birthdays, I got gift cards and awkward hugs. Julian got parties' noise attention. Every year, I shrank a little more inside. When I turned 17, I packed everything I owned into 2 bags and left without a plan. I was done pretending it was a home. No one chased after me, no one called. It was like they'd been waiting for me to disappear. I scraped by on couches, and part-time jobs, learned to live with little, got used to silence. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was something close to it. Years later, when the world fell apart and I had nowhere left to go, I made the mistake of calling them. When the hotel closed down, they didn't even call us into the office. Just a group email and a final paycheck that barely covered rent. I had 3 weeks to figure out where to go. My roommate packed and left within days, headed back to her parents' place. I didn't have that option. I sold what I could, donated the rest, and used the last of my savings to buy a battered camper shell for my truck. It leaked when it rained and smelled like wet cardboard, but it was mine. I called my mom, asked if I could park in their driveway for a few weeks. She hesitated, said they had too much going on. Julian and Mira had moved in and the house is just full. Mira sent a text a day later. Hope the truck bed's cozy. I found a grocery store parking lot that didn't tow and learned how to stretch meals out of a cooler and cheap instant food. I ran a cord from church outlets when no one was looking and used the 24-hour gym for showers. It was the lowest I'd ever been. But in the quiet, I learned how to live without asking. I learned what I needed, what I could endure. I learned to sleep through sirens and wake without fear. I didn't know it yet, but that camper, the one they mocked, was the first thing I'd ever truly owned. The job came through a friend of a friend who worked at a shipping warehouse in the next city over. It wasn't glamorous boxes, forklifts, early shifts, late nights, but it paid more than minimum wage and didn't ask many questions. The manager, a tall man named Ron with sun-creased skin and a smoker's laugh, glanced once at the camper on the back of my truck and just nodded. I parked near the rear fence where no one bothered to look twice. Nobody said a word as long as I showed up on time and didn't complain. The routine saved me. Mornings started before the sun rose. I'd slip on gloves, load pallets, keep my head down. No one cared who I was or where I slept. They cared if I showed up, if I pulled my weight. And I did. Every hour of overtime I could grab. Every weekend shift no one else wanted. I didn't have anywhere better to be, and work kept my mind from drifting. When it got cold, Ron let me run a heavy-duty extension cord from the side of the building so I could plug in a small heater. I told him I'd work Sundays for free to pay for the power. He waved me off, but I worked Sundays anyway. Little by little, I built up a savings account. I bought new tires, replaced the camper's insulation, got a gym membership just for the showers. On weekends, I'd sit inside the camper with a warm drink, listening to the rain drum on the roof and feeling somehow safe. It wasn't just shelter, it was mine. I kept my world small. No calls to my family, no updates on social media. I stopped caring if anyone knew I existed. That silence, once suffocating, had become my freedom. Months passed like that, quiet and disciplined. And then, one afternoon, after a long shift and a quiet walk back to my truck, I found myself staring at a listing taped to the break room wall. A house, small, close, affordable. I almost didn't take the number, but my hand moved before I could stop it. The house wasn't anything fancy, a 3-bedroom manufactured home with faded siding and a sagging front step, but it had plumbing, a real roof, and walls that were mine. I put nearly every dollar I'd saved into the down payment and cried in the parking lot of the loan office after signing the papers. Not out of sadness, but something closer to exhaustion, relief, disbelief. I didn't tell anyone for days. I just drove past it in the evenings, watched it sit quietly beneath the pale porch light like it was waiting for me to come home. When I finally moved in, I slept on the floor the first night wrapped in 2 blankets with a space heater buzzing beside me. It was the best sleep I'd had in years. The next day, I parked the truck in the back and lowered the camper off the bed. I cleaned it, covered it with a tarp, and left it tucked near the fence like a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. A week later, on impulse, I posted a photo on Facebook. Just the porch light and the house number with the caption, "Built this life," from the back of a truck. I didn't expect anything. I got a few likes, a message from an old coworker. Then silence. 3 weeks later, they showed up. Julie and Mira, my parents, all standing on my porch like they were arriving at a family reunion. I never gave them my address. They never asked if they could come. I opened the door stunned, and they all pushed inside before I could speak. They wandered through the rooms like tourists in a model home. Mira whispered something in Julian's ear and giggled. My mother nodded, smiling. "You've got a lot of space for just one person," she said, running her fingers along the hallway wall. My father stood in the kitchen looking around like he was already rearranging the cabinets. I didn't say much, just followed them from room to room, heart pounding, mouth dry. It was like watching a slow invasion. When they finally left, Julian lingered by the door hand on the frame. "Let's talk soon," he said. "I've got something I think you'll want to hear." Julian came by the next afternoon alone this time with a to-go cup in his hand and that casual confidence he'd always worn like a jacket. He didn't knock, just tapped once and let himself in like it was still our childhood home and I was just borrowing the space. I've been thinking he started settling into my kitchen chair like it belonged to him. This place makes sense for us. Closer to my job, better school district, you've got the extra rooms. He took a sip and smiled like he'd just offered me a winning lottery ticket. Mira's pregnant again, by the way. So yeah, we could really use the space. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. You'd still be here, obviously, he continued, waving his hand like this had all been pre-approved. But we'd need the master for the baby. You could take the smaller room or honestly just move back into the camper for now. You were comfortable in there before, right? I didn't say anything. He leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. There'd have to be some structure, of course. Quiet hours. No guests without clearing it with us. We'd split groceries, but Mira cooks, so that's a win for you. That was when something in me snapped, not violently, not theatrically, but like a wire pulled too tight for too long. I stood palms flat on the table and looked my brother in the face. "No," I said. He blinked, confused. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean you're not moving in. You're not rearranging my house. You're not making rules, and I'm not sleeping in a camper so you and Mira can play house in something you didn't earn." His smile faltered. "Celeste, be reasonable. I've been reasonable my whole life. I was reasonable when Mom let you lie about breaking my wrist. I was reasonable when you borrowed my college fund for a business idea. I was even reasonable when you all left me living behind a warehouse and didn't care enough to ask where I was." He opened his mouth to say something else, but I didn't let him. "This is my house. Mine. You don't get to come in and take it." Julian left without finishing his coffee. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed felt like something I had chosen. It was a Thursday afternoon when I pulled into the driveway and noticed something was wrong. My welcome mat was crooked, the porch light was on, and the blinds in the living room, normally drawn tight, were open. I tried my key in the front door. It didn't fit. I tried again, slower, my hand shaking. Still nothing. I walked around to the side of the house and saw Julian's truck parked by the curb tailgate down. Inside the house, through the window, I saw Mira stacking boxes in my hallway like she'd lived there her whole life. Julian appeared behind her holding one of my blankets. They weren't moving in. They had moved in. I knocked hard, once, twice. Mira turned her head and smirked. Julian came to the door, didn't even bother to look sheepish. "What are you doing here?" he said, like I was the one trespassing. "This is my house," I said, my voice cold. He held up a folded paper already creased and stained. You signed this. Rental agreement. You said we could take the place for a while. My name was scribbled at the bottom. The signature didn't even match. You forged that, I said. Mira came up behind him, arms crossed, belly slightly showing. Don't be dramatic, Celeste. You left the door wide open. We just made it official. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Julian tried to block the lens, but I kept filming. You're trespassing, I said calmly. And you broke my lock. Mira lunged forward, slapped the phone from my hand. It hit the floor hard, still recording. I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. I showed my deed, the texts even pulled up the Facebook post with the house number and date. Julian sputtered, tried to push the fake lease again. Mira cursed at the officers and accused me of abandoning the property. It didn't work. They were ordered to leave immediately. The officers stood by as Julian and Mira dragged their boxes back to the truck in silence, Mira muttering threats under her breath the whole time. When the door finally shut behind me, the air inside was still warm from them. I locked it twice and stood in the hallway, heart racing as if the walls themselves needed to be reminded who they belonged to. I posted the video without a caption. Just Julian waving that forged lease, Mira slapping my phone and the sound of my voice, calm, steady, naming what they'd done. At first, I thought I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. An aunt from California messaged saying, "Now it all makes sense. I always wondered why you disappeared. Even people from work saw it and said, good for you. That took guts." Meanwhile, Mira vanished from social media. Julian went quiet. My parents didn't post their usual Sunday brunch pictures. The silence on their end said more than words ever could. Then, one evening, my parents showed up on my porch. No warning, no apology. "Julian's going through a hard time," my mom said. "This is making things worse." My father added, "You've proved your point. Can't you just let it go? For the family?" I looked at them, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. "I am doing this for the family," I said. "The part that never tried to steal from me." They stood there speechless. At that moment, Naomi, my cousin, pulled into the driveway. She stepped out and stood beside me without a word. That was the last time my parents tried to guilt me. And that weekend, I made a copy of the house key for Naomi. A week later, Julian texted me like nothing had happened. "Hey, can we talk?" "It's about the kids." "And rent." I agreed to meet him in the driveway. He showed up alone, hands in his pockets, eyes darting everywhere but at me. He said Mira wasn't working, the kids were growing fast formula, and diapers were expensive. They'd just fallen behind. He didn't ask to move in again just for money. Even a few $100 a month would help, he said, voice low, rehearsed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I walked him through my spreadsheet, showed him the cost of property tax insurance, the repairs I'd already done. Then I showed him a list of incoming tenants. I had started renting out the back room and the basement studio to 2 women from work. Quiet, respectful, paid on time. "I don't have money to spare," I said simply. "I didn't buy this house to become a bank for someone who tried to take it from me." Julian didn't argue. He just nodded lips tight and walked back to his truck. A few days later, Mira drove by and screamed out the window. Called me a thief, a traitor, a cold, barren witch. I stood at the kitchen sink, watched her through the curtain, and didn't move. The tenants arrived later that day with their suitcases and grocery bags. One of them baked bread and brought me a loaf without being asked. The other watered the lawn before work every morning. The house felt different now, full but quiet, lived in but peaceful. That night, I opened the tarp on the camper and aired it out. I didn't know it yet, but I'd need it again. Just not for me. The rumors started small, just whispers from people who knew someone who knew Mira. A coworker, a neighbor. Then, someone forwarded me a screenshot of a message thread that made everything clear. She'd been seeing another man. Not recently, through most of her marriage. Julian didn't want to believe it. He denied it until the truth forced itself into daylight. The dates didn't match. The baby didn't look like him. A paternity test finally ended the guessing. The youngest wasn't his. When the results came in, something in Julian broke. Mira didn't take it well. She threw things, screamed at him in front of the kids. When their oldest tried to step between them, she turned on him too. Someone called the police. They found her outside barefoot and shaking, yelling into the night. She was taken in, and Julian was left standing in the driveway, holding his son's hand. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The divorce was fast. Mira disappeared supposedly to Arizona. She didn't take the kids. Julian moved back into our parents' house. I heard he barely spoke. My parents stopped showing their faces at church. No more excuses, no more bragging. I sat on my porch that evening, warm drink in hand, listening to the quiet. Not happy, not angry, just still, just done. And then a few days later, Julian returned to my doorstep, only this time he wasn't asking for the house. Julian didn't knock this time. He just stood at the bottom of the steps, hands in his pockets, eyes heavy. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. "I'm not here to ask for the house," he said. "I know better." I waited. "It's for Luca," he added. "He's not sleeping well at Mom and Dad's. Too much noise. Too many people. He asked if we could live somewhere quieter. He misses having space." I looked past him to where the camper sat beneath the tree, clean and unused. I thought of the nights I spent in there, shivering with a blanket pulled to my chin, pretending the thin walls made me safe. I thought of how that camper had taught me to survive when no one else would help. "I'm not giving it to you," I said. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. I stepped off the porch and led him to the backyard. Told him he could park it behind the house where I could keep an eye on things. That there would be rules, no loud visitors, no Mira, no overnight stays from anyone he couldn't introduce face to face. I wrote it all down, made him sign it, and recorded us shaking hands. Julian didn't argue. He just nodded, voice low. "Thank you. Really?" I didn't say anything back, just handed him the spare keys and walked inside. He moved in that evening, and by morning I heard the soft thump of a soccer ball in the grass. One night, long after the kids had fallen asleep, I heard a muffled sound from the camper. I walked out expecting to find something broken or spilled. Instead, I found Julian sitting on the camper floor, shoulders, shaking hands covering his face. "I ruined everything," he whispered. "I let her ruin us, and I let them ruin you." I didn't interrupt. I didn't touch him. I let him speak until the silence stretched between us like a bridge we both knew we wouldn't cross. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just wanted you to know I see it now. All of it." I nodded once, then left him there with his grief. The days passed slowly. The kids stayed longer in my yard. They helped water the garden, drew chalk pictures on the driveway, brought me flowers they picked from weeds. They never asked questions. They just stayed close. My parents came by one Sunday afternoon. No speech, no defense. Just quiet eyes and a tired look. "We were wrong," my mother said. "You didn't deserve it." For once, they didn't ask for anything in return.